Good evening, I'm Laurie Johnson. Welcome to Houston Public Media's web series, Political Perspectives. Every week, I'll be joined by show commentators Aiyer and Brandon Rottinghaus to discuss all things political. Tonight, we'll continue the conversation from Red, White, and Blue about who is ahead in the bid for the Democratic and Republican presidential nominations. So let's get started, Jay and Brandon. Let's start with the Democrats. Did we think that Bernie Sanders would still be so strong in the race at this point? I mean, was Hillary kind of expecting to be out on her own by now?
Well, I think she probably thought that Super Tuesday, the first of the three Super Tuesdays, would have been the knockout blow for Sanders, and that he would be out of it. But I think the difference for him is that he's really done a masterful job where you have closed primaries, where you have caucuses. He's got great organization, and his sort of magic has been this ability to garner large amounts of small dollar donations. He continues to raise a tremendous amount of money. And, you know, he really speaks to the far left of the Democratic Party. And you've got this sort of, he has a fundamentally different message, I think, than Secretary Clinton does. And that's helped him stay relevant in this. I think the problem for him is he's doing it in an atmosphere where his message is somewhat drowned out by really both sides on the Democratic side by this just carnival atmosphere that you've seen on the Republican side that's just dominating everything.
Mm-hmm. So what is in it for him? Why does he stay in if it's sort of a foregone conclusion that Hillary Clinton will win the nomination?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jay's point was good, is that he wants to start a revolution. I mean, he wants really there to be genuine change, and I think that there's something that's positive about that for the party, because there is a significant wing of the party that wants to find this momentum and wants to be able to have this more liberal version of itself. The problem is that that version has not been terribly successful so far. Secretary Clinton needs to show that she's much more able to speak to that group, and since she came on the scene, she was a new Democrat, and just like Bill Clinton, and that's a much more conservative version of the party, but it was very successful. So I think half the party thinks we can compromise a bit and be slightly more conservative and be successful, or we can produce a much more kind of liberal version. That's the tension, I think, that creates this complication. So the fact that he's still around is, gives, I think, life to that notion that the party is definitely sort of two parts. The Republicans have the same issue, but I think it's also a rules issue. I mean, Bernie Sanders is winning in part because the rules allow them to. These are basically winner-take-all states, or these are basically proportional states where you've got the stepping stone, and every time you've got a state that's in play, you've got both of them securing delegates. And so no one's going to go home with a big sack of delegates. And that's going to continue to the end, even though presumptively this is something that, I think Hillary Clinton's going to win.
So getting down to that idea on the Republican side, do we see Trump heading for securing the GOP nomination?
Well, right now he's on course, right? So the magic number on the Republican side is 1273 in terms of delegates, and he's about 500 or so, a little under that away. He needs to, if you look at the projections, get about half the delegates that are out there, a little bit over. He looks like he could get there. When you look at the states that are left in play, many of them are large, not really traditionally conservative states that he's tended to do well in. California, New York is still out there, New Jersey is still out there. So he's got that going for him. So he looks like he could make it. But I mean, it's interesting. He really fundamentally changes the whole trajectory of the Republican Party if he gets in there. If you think of, on the Democratic side, if you think of Bernie Sanders as sort of the 1968 George McGovern and Hillary Clinton as 1992 Democrat, Donald Trump is nothing. He's a totally new kind of Republican, right? I mean, he's anti-free trade. He likes social issues on some things. He's in favor of Planned Parenthood and others. But he's just violently anti-immigrant. He's almost like a 1920s sort of style conservative. So he's a totally different kind of person. So that remake will be interesting. But yeah, I think he can get there.
And it's the good and the bad here. I mean, I think Jay is right that you've got Trump as a sort of new version of the Republican Party. It's not that much. It is very different than the version that we typically are used to seeing, which is much more sort of conservative in that kind of mold. But so it's good and bad, right? It's good because you've got people who are excited about the race, and that brings him attention. He's got free media, which gives him a platform that no candidate ever probably has had. But the problem is that you've got huge favorability issues for him, and he's creating a problem of the party, for the party, where he's dragging down the ticket. And if you've got major differences between favorability and unfavorability, then that gets washed across the entirety of the nation. So the Democrats are within range of taking back the Senate. You've got a bunch of races there that are in play, that if you have a huge turnout surge in places like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Illinois, those seats go to the Democrats, right? You probably also got about a dozen House seats that are below that that are also in play if Trump continues along these same lines and doesn't try to find a way to kind of right that ship. So the fact is that although there's a positive effect, I think, for Trump, even in the Electoral College, right? If it's the case that Trump is exciting voters in places that you would otherwise expect it, he could actually end up doing better than your average Republican candidate. But it's the down ballot that's the problem. And we have so much focus on what the president does and the presidency. The fact is that more than 90% of the other stuff that happens is happening at that level. You've got local races, you've got statewide races. So these are all, I think, problems that he helps to create as much as he's helping to energize this base.
So you've both alluded to something that is happening here, which is that Donald Trump seems to be speaking to a group of people who have felt disenfranchised by their party and are all of a sudden re-energized, interested in politics, interested in his candidacy, because they felt, for whatever reason, that their values, their issues weren't being represented. Does a Trump candidacy, whether he wins in November or not, fundamentally change the GOP?
I mean, I think that's a really good question, and I'm not sure if we really know the answer. When you look back in historical terms, the last time you had this sort of hard shift was the 1980 election of Ronald Reagan. Prior to 1980, the Republican Party was really, I think, divided when it came on social issues. It was much more of a small government conservative party, but it was anti-debt. It was anti sort of blanket cutting of taxes. I mean, famously, during the era of Dwight Eisenhower's presidency, we had some of the highest tax rates we'd ever had. So will that be take that model? Meaning if he runs, if he wins, does it fundamentally change it? I think if he wins, it certainly does. If Donald Trump becomes president of the United States, the Republican Party as we know it will look more like Donald Trump. The issue will be what happens if he loses. In 1968, the Democrats ran George McGovern. He got wiped out. But it fundamentally changed the Democratic Party in a direction where every subsequent candidate, really on social issues, moved in his direction. So are we seeing the beginning of a more protectionist GOP, a more anti-immigrant GOP, a GOP that is more populist in tone? Very well could be, but we just don't know yet because it's hard to get a sense as to really the direction of the GOP because there has clearly been a disconnect between what the leadership and the establishment has wanted and what I think some of the folks voting in the party are.
So does this get us to a point where, as perhaps the parties grow more and more polarized, that it's time for a third party in the middle? Is there a viable place for a third party in American politics?
The right place and the right time, there are opportunities, but the problem is that polarization does create a moment where everyone is basically sorted into their own faction. So it's unlikely that you're going to find traction. And also it makes it difficult, frankly, state by state to get on the ballot in those cases. So even the practical element of having a third party is tough. And I think Trump creates this momentary change. I don't think it's a durable change. And that's what we look for when we talk about critical elections, right? When you look at the elections for Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, FDR, and then Reagan, as Jay said, these are elections where really had a fundamental shift in a bisecting of the ideology of the day. That I don't think is happening. I think that Trump is exciting people in a particular moment, in a particular way. He is an exciting person, right? He is an interesting character. And for all of the bad things he probably does and says, there is something there that excites people. And so you've got this moment where people are joining. But I don't know that it's that durable. So I think that the party itself will have to reconsider. There are no perfect candidates, right? These parties are all big tent parties, right? And they're all looking for the right person at the right time, right? This is sort of the right now time, right? There's no perfect choice, because if they were perfect, they'd have their own party, right? You wouldn't even need that. It'd be something more like a revolution. So there always is this friction. We had the friction in 1980. Abraham Lincoln was no consensus candidate, right? This is something that we see parties doing all the time. They have to resolve in and of themselves these sorts of problems. So Trump might not be perfect, but at the moment, the GOP is going to have to figure out whether they can live with it or not. So the third party, doubtful, right? I think this is an absorption issue.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for watching the program. Remember to log on to houstonpublicmedia.org/perspectives every Friday night at 8 p.m. following the 7:30 broadcast of Red, White, and Blue. Thanks so much for watching. See you again next week.